On today's show, Ja Morant is out for the rest of the season. How should the Memphis Grizzlies move forward now without Ja Morant? Should they try and stay competitive and see if they can salvage this season, or bottom out and try and secure a top draft asset? And if they go that route, should they trade that pick and try and get Ja Morant some extra help, or should they draft a young player to add to their core moving forward? It's all coming up right here at Locked On NBA.
You are Locked On NBA, your daily NBA podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On NBA, the biggest stories with the local experts. I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, also host of Locked On Rockets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL postseason is here, and there is no better time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place just a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose, and all you have to do is wager $5. It's that simple. The app is so easy to use, and there's so many different ways to bet, like live same-game parlays. You can find bets in the new Explore tab, make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, the best way to find popular parlays, and so much more. Right now, you can take a look at the outright betting favorites for this year's Super Bowl. The San Francisco 49ers at plus 190, the Ravens right behind them at plus 270, and then a little bit further off, you got the Kansas City Chiefs at plus 600, the Bills at plus 600, and the Detroit Lions at plus 1,000. So for all those odds and so much more, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get in on the NFL postseason action this year. Again, that's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Joining us now is the host of Locked On Grizzlies, Joe Mullinax. You can track down wherever you listen to your podcasts and on YouTube. Just search Locked On Grizzlies. And Joe, this is like, it's got to be like a roller coaster of emotions for Grizzlies fans, right? Because you don't have Ja Morant to start the season because of the suspension. He comes back for a cup of coffee, and now he's sidelined for the rest of the year with a shoulder injury, underwent successful surgery, all that. But now the Grizzlies are without their star player. And this has got to be a bit of whiplash for Grizzlies fans at this point.
Well, you left out the part, and not that I expect you to have this known. Of course, people come to Locked On Grizzlies for hard-hitting analysis like this, but the Grizzlies were 6-3 with Ja Morant, which is exactly the pace that they needed to be at to make the play-in guesstimate, right? Give or take a game. So they were literally doing exactly what they needed to do with Ja Morant in order to get into the play-in conversation, and that dream is all but died. Desmond Bane rolled his ankle on in a recent game. So there was a game that they played, I think it was against the Knicks, where they, had multiple stars out. Just a really tough season. It brings back, folks that have been following the Grizzlies for a while. The 28-guy season, the Hateful Eight, we called them, where, Matt Barnes was playing meaningful minutes, and the Grizzlies scraped into the playoffs and got obliterated in the first round because they were playing just guys literally that they found off the street. It's giving off vibes like that. Not quite that bad just yet, but it hasn't been great. Obviously, Ja being the biggest name, but Marcus Smart being out again is a real kick in the pants. They're missing multiple bigs. There's silver linings, right? Like G.G. Jackson looking like he would be a probable lottery pick if he was in the 2024 NBA draft, but he came out early, was drafted by the Grizzlies in the second round last year. That's looking cool, right? Like, it's nice to see him playing well, but that doesn't help in terms of this team being capable of making the postseason this season, which again, they're about to have three guys on, $9-figure plus $1 million contracts. You want to start seeing some progression in that goal.
Yeah, the current Grizzlies injury list is more than halfway
long
down.
But distinguished.
Yeah, there you go. Sure. I mean, they've got, if I count right now, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 guys on the injury report for the Grizzlies right now. That's well over half the roster at this point. Look, Joe, I mean, I guess the way to kind of unpack this, right, the decision kind of standing before the Grizzlies at this point is, do you try and stay competitive? Do you still try and see what you can make of this season, or do you bottom out and try and secure a top draft pick? Let's start with that first option. I mean, what would there to be gained, or what could be gained from a Grizzlies team that tries to stay competitive and maybe see if they can, luck out and make a play in tournament even without Ja Morant this season?
I think I can answer both questions at the same time. They can just kind of keep doing what they're doing. I don't know that outside of Luke Kennard, because again, Marcus Smart is going to be out until around the All-Star break, trade deadline. I don't think anybody's going to trade for Marcus Smart at this point. It's possible, I guess, but I don't know that that's going to happen. Luke Kennard is a explosive three-point shooter, but that's about all he is. My co-host Michael Cole on Locked On Grizzlies calls him a try-hard on defense, which is a nice way of saying he tries, but he's bad. I think that the only reason somebody would want Kennard is that three-point specialty and the fact he's a team option next year. So maybe it's somebody that needs some luxury tax help trying to avoid that second apron. Maybe they would want Kennard. Maybe there's a team like Detroit or Toronto, our old friend Coach Darko up there in with the Raptors. Maybe they want to take a swing on Zaire Williams, think he's still a lottery talent and that sort of thing. The Grizzlies have a bevy of wings, and Vince Williams Jr. and Gigi Jackson are the ones, especially Vince Williams Jr., who have kind of fleshed out that'll be a part of the core long term. I think a lot of these other guys could potentially be moved, but I think it's going to be for the right deal, because if you look at the lay of the land, and I know you know this, Jackson, in the Western Conference, there's teams that are really bad, right? Like the Trailblazers, the San Antonio Spurs. The Grizzlies, as long as they don't have catastrophic injuries, because Desmond Bane rolled his ankle, he should be fine. Jaren Jackson Jr. has a bruised knee, he should be okay. As long as they don't have catastrophic injuries to those guys, the Grizzlies aren't as bad as those teams, even without Ja Morant, right? And then the rest of the teams in the Western Conference, except for Utah, they're actively trying to get into the play-in, and Utah might make it in spite of themselves, right? So you have a Western Conference that's extremely competitive. You have a Grizzlies team who's stuck in purgatory, and then you have a couple of teams that are really bad. The Eastern Conference, it's similar, right? The Washington Wizards, Detroit Pistons, super bad basketball teams that the Grizzlies can't be as bad as, even if they tried. And if they tried, that would mean trading Jaren Jackson Jr., Desmond Bane. They're obviously not going to do that. So I think they can evaluate the talent that they have on the roster, look ahead to next season, which you assume that you have Steven Adams and Brandon Clark, who Brandon Clark could return around the All-Star break as well. But you'll have all of those guys healthy alongside Ja Morant, against Steven Adams, Brandon Clark. And you would imagine the Grizzlies are going to have a little more urgency and maybe make a big swing in the offseason and try to bring in somebody to help them be contenders going into next year. I think you evaluate who's going to be a part of that process, right? Like Vince Williams Jr. has already earned that. He signed a new contract. That guy's a part of the core moving forward. You can evaluate what you currently have, compete every game, even with Jaren Jackson Jr. and Desmond Bane, and you're probably going to fluctuate between the 6th and the 8th spot in the lottery. There's not really a major difference there anymore, right? So you might as well just go out and play. If the right trade comes along, you listen, of course. But I think the Grizzlies kind of just see this as a blown year, evaluate the talent that you have at the end of the roster, and you move on from there, hoping that 2024, 2025 will be better.
Now, we saw, a couple years back, right? The Warriors were a little bit in this position, right? They had that year, they were decimated by injuries. They walk away with the top pick. They wind up selecting, they wind up taking Wiseman and getting cooked, deservedly so, for that selection. But and at the time they were kind of ridiculed because they didn't use that pick to trade and go get another kind of win now piece. What do you expect the Grizzlies to potentially do with this pick at the end of this all, when we get through this season? If they do kind of bottom out, they're somewhere in that 5, 6, 8 range, whatever, would you expect them to maybe move that draft asset and get another contributing member for this team, or draft a young guy and just kind of have another piece of this young, exciting Grizzlies roster?
Precedent suggests that they're going to keep the pick, right? And they'll draft somebody, either a big to replace Steven Adams long-term, because obviously Adams is getting older, had this PCL injury in his knee, or a wing, right? Somebody like that. They take another one of those guys, add to the young core. That's what precedent would suggest. But Zach Kleiman, the Grizzlies GM, has come out numerous times and said, did we really need to triple down on youth? Did we really need to keep going down that path? It might be time to put his money where his mouth is and maybe learn a lesson from the Golden State Warriors and use that pick. Again, let's say it's 6th, right? 6th in the lottery. You could get a pretty impressive player at that place. Or you can use that, package it with expiring money, package it with a young piece or two. The Grizzlies don't have a ton of interesting pieces in that way. Let's say somebody talks themselves into the potential of Zaire Williams, who has played better in the last 6 or 7 games. Zaire Williams, 6th pick in the 2024 NBA draft. maybe that gets you a wing that can compete. And the Grizzlies have all of their first round picks beyond that. So if they really want to go in and, Brooklyn decides to punt on Mikal Bridges, they probably won't. But let's just say they do. In theory, the Grizzlies could offer a pretty good trade, right? There's possibilities that they could pursue. I think if you go off of what Zach Kleiman has been throughout his time in Memphis, they'll make a selection. They'll continue to be patient. Should they be? No, they probably need to go in now because you never know when the next suspension, long-term injury. The Grizzlies and their fans have been hit with a lot of stuff over the last 12 months that all should add up to seize the day. Carpe diem. It's time to go make a run at this thing because the Grizzlies are about to be in the luxury tax for the first time. And while I do think Robert Pera, billionaire owner of the Memphis Grizzlies, is going to be okay with that for a time, in Memphis, there's going to be an expiration date on how long that luxury tax thing lasts.
How competitive will the Memphis Grizzlies look without Ja Morant over the course of the rest of this season? And will this season bear the fruit of a top draft asset if they kind of, organically bottom out a little bit? And what will they ultimately do? Draft a young player to join this Memphis Grizzlies core, or trade the pick to get Ja Morant and the rest of the Grizzlies a little bit more help for next season? You'll have us covered for all of that and so much more over at Locked On Grizzlies. Joe, thanks for stopping by Locked On NBA with me.
Anytime, buddy. Happy to be here.